I want all of you to picture this for a moment. Let's say you are on a beach that looks like it was designed by someone who had never seen a bad day. The water is that impossible kind of blue. The forest behind you is so thick and old that the light barely gets through. And somewhere in that darkness, there is a tribe, maybe a few hundred people who have lived on that island for thousands of years, completely unbothered by the outside world. And swimming towards this beach right now is a leatherback turtle, the biggest turtle on earth, up to 7 feet long, close to 1,000 kilograms. It's crossed the Indian Ocean, possibly all the way from Australia, just to lay its eggs on this exact beach. Now, it's been doing this for millions of years. Now, imagine someone deciding to build an airport here. Not a small one, a 13,000 crore airport with a 10,000 foot runway designed to land fighter jets. That decision was made this particular week. So the question is, why you should care? You don't live on the Great Nicobar Island. You have probably never heard of Galicia Bay. And honestly, India builds infrastructure all the time. So what's different about this one? Here's what's different. The single island sits at a point on the map that shapes what China does, what the US does, and what India can or cannot do in the next 50 years. The decisions being made on this tiny piece of land, 910 square kilometers, most of it is jungle, will determine whether India becomes a serious maritime power in Asia or stays a country that pays a foreign port to handle its own cargo. Speaking of which, did you know that right now, India pays to ship its own goods to Sri Lanka? Every time a container from Chennai or Kochi needs to go to Europe, it often stops at Colombo port first. India loses somewhere around $200 and $220 million every single year because we don't have a deep water transshipment port of our own. We are essentially paying rent to our neighbors to handle our trade. The Great Nicobar Project promises to fix that and to do a lot more besides. But here's the one thing. The people who think that this project is a catastrophic mistake are not fringe activists. They include genocide experts, former IS officers, ecologists from the Indian Institute of Sciences, and the Supreme Court-backed National Green Tribunal, which once issued a stay on the whole thing. So let's actually understand what's actually going on, because this is not a simple story of development versus environment. It is something much more messier and much more important than that. See, to understand the Great Nicobar Project, you first have to understand what the Malacca Strait actually means for the world. Imagine a narrow strip of water, about 40 miles wide at its narrowest point, sitting between Malaysia and the Indonesian island of Sumatra. This is the Malacca Strait, as you can see on the map. And through this strip of water passes approximately 94,000 ships every single year. Around 25 to 30% of all the global trade flows through it. That's more than the Suez Canal and the Panama Canal combined. Just imagine. Now, the total value of the goods that moves through this Malacca Strait annually is around $3.5 trillion. Yes, $3.5 trillion. And now here's the number that makes even China nervous at night. Around 80% of China's crude oil imports passes through this Malacca Strait. 80%. So this passage, it gets blocked. Say during a conflict, China's economy doesn't slow down. It chokes if this passage blocks. Chinese strategists, they actually have a name for this fear. They call it as Malacca Dilemma. And sitting right at the western entrance of the Malacca Strait, like a natural watchtower, is the Great Nicobar Island, India's southernmost point. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. Great Nicobar doesn't have a great story of strategic use so far. Indian Navy has a small air station there, INS Baz, with a runway that's barely 4,500 feet long. Not long enough for most military operations. Not long enough to project real power. For decades, India has had a geographical advantage here that is largely haven't been used. Meanwhile, China has been playing a very different game. You all must have heard of string of pearls. So its string of pearls strategy involves building or investing in ports across the Indian Ocean region, in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, in Myanmar and beyond. And the strategic idea is to surround India with a Chinese maritime presence. So the port in Colombo, Sri Lanka, China Merchants Port Holdings has invested there. The port in Hambantota, Sri Lanka, China literally owns a 99-year lease on it. So India is sitting on what could be the single most strategically located piece of real estate in the Indo-Pacific region, and it has, for most of its independent history, done almost nothing with it. Just imagine. The Great Nicobar Project is India's attempt to finally cash that particular check, which is pending since the last many decades. And the project was conceived by Niti Aayog and approved approved by the Union Cabinet in 2021, the Great Nicobar Project. It is led by the Andaman and Nicobar Island Integrated Development Corporation, ANIIDCO. The original cost estimate was around 72,000 crores, but by 2025, the number had been revised upward towards 81,000 crore. And it's a 30-year project unfolding in 3 phases, the first of which will run from 2025 to 2035. 4 things are being built there. A massive international container transshipment terminal, that is ICTT, which is costed at around 41,000 crores with an ultimate capacity of handling 16 million containers per year. A greenfield civil military airport, a 450 megawatt power plant running on gas and solar, and a township to house the people who built and run all of it. Now, the ambition, as our Prime Minister Modi ji has described it, is to turn Great Nicobar into a global maritime, trade and logistics hub. The Jebel Ali of the East, the Singapore of the Bay of Bengal. It is by any measure one of the most audacious infrastructure project of India that India has ever attempted. And this brings us to this week's development, which is the specific trigger for this particular video which I'm making right now. The government has just approved the construction of a 13,000 crore greenfield civil military airport at a location called Shingen near Galicia Bay. It's on the southern eastern coast of the Great Nicobar, and it will serve both military and civil aviation, which means it will remain under the operational control of the Indian Navy, and it is expected to be completed within the next 5 years. Now, what is notable is that what this airport is replacing. See, the original plan was to expand the existing INS Baz runway from 4,500 feet to about 10,000 feet, but detailed feasibility studies showed that expanding the existing runway was extremely difficult because of the terrain. Also, navigational challenges were there, and there was a need for massive supporting infrastructure. Officials also concluded, and this is a part they put out in their official statements, that expanding the old runway would actually have a greater impact on tribal settlements and wildlife than building a brand new airport at the greenfield site. Now, let that sit for a second. The government's justification for building a 13,000 crore airport in a place that environmentalists consider one of the most ecologically sensitive zones on earth is partly that it is the less destructive option. Now, before you get into why the critics aren't buying that, let me give you the full picture of what this airport and the larger project represents strategically, because the case for it is generally strong, and it's very, very strong. See, because the case for it is genuinely very strong. See, an operational 10,000 foot runway at the southern tip of Andaman and Nicobar archipelago would allow India to operate a heavy military aircraft, also surveillance platforms, and a long-range maritime patrol aircraft from a position that directly overlooks the Malacca Strait and the 6 degrees channel, one of the key passages between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. See, India's ability to monitor and, if necessary, interdict Chinese naval activity in this corridor would be massively enhanced if this project goes through. And on the economic side, the case is just as real. Right now, 75% of India's transshipped cargo is handled at foreign ports. Colombo port alone handles 45% of all India's transshipped goods. And this is not just a revenue problem, it's a vulnerability, because Colombo port is increasingly in China's commercial orbit. China's merchant port holding has invested heavily there, I've already told you. And India is, in a very real sense, routing its trade through infrastructure that a strategic rival is financially embedded in. Now, the Great Nicobar ICTT, the transshipment terminal, is designed to capture 20 to 30% of the regional cargo that currently goes through Singapore and Colombo. And if successful, it would make India an actual hub, not just a participant in the Asian maritime trade. And here's a retention hook for you. 11 companies, including Larsen and Toubro, Afcon's infrastructure and JSW infrastructure, have already submitted expressions of interest for the port project. And this money is real money. The timeline is moving. But now let's talk about what the other side is saying. And I want to be very precise here, because the criticism isn't coming from people who don't understand strategy or development. It is coming from people who actually do. And Great Nicobar Island is not a random patch of jungle. Over 95% of it is a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. It contains 2 national parks, Campbell Bay and Galicia. It supports at least 767 known animal species and 811 plant species. Many of these, the Nicobar megapode, the Nicobar long-tailed macaque, the Nicobar scops owl, the Nicobar serpent eagle, the Nicobar tree shrew, are found nowhere else on on Earth. They are endemic, meaning if the island is damaged beyond recovery, these species are gone permanently from the planet. And then there's Galicia Bay, the specific location where the port and the airport are going to be built. This is not just any coastal area. According to the Zoological Survey of India, Galicia Bay is the single most important nesting site for the giant leatherback turtle in the entire northern Indian Ocean. See, the leatherback is the largest turtle species on Earth, and these animals, they travel thousands of kilometers from Australia, from parts of Africa to lay their eggs on their specific beach, the specific beach. And here's the part that should actually stop you in cold. In January 2021, the Ministry of Environment formally listed Galicia Bay as the largest leatherback turtle nesting ground in the country and an important maritime turtle habitat. And then 1 week later, the same government quietly denotified the sanctuary status of Galicia Bay to clear the way for the project. The environmental clearance that followed was challenged at the NGT, National Green Tribunal, which at one point issued a stay order on the project. Opposition leaders, including several senior leaders, alleged that institutions like Zoological Survey of India and Wildlife Institute of India were, and in their words, coerced into facilitating the environmental clearances. See, the government denies it, of course, and the forest diversion because of this is other number that is very hard to ignore. See, this project involves clearing approximately 130 square kilometers of forests. Around 9.64 lakh trees are to be felled, and some independent estimates puts the total even higher. And when you clear 130 square kilometers of old growth tropical forest, you're not causing temporary damage, you are causing irreversible damage, and there is no version of this where the forest comes back. And then there's the question that almost nobody in the mainstream debate wants to talk about directly. The Shompen. The Shompen are a particularly vulnerable tribal group, a PVTG in a government language, who lives in the interior forest of Great Nicobar. They're semi-nomadic, forest-dependent, and with a minimal contact with the outside world. In 1956, the government of India demarcated the entire island as a tribal reserve, specifically carved out for Shompen and the Nicobarese community. Now, the Shompen's entire existence is bound to this particular forest. In 2024, 39 genocide experts from around the world wrote that the Great Nicobar Project would be, in their words, a death knell for the Shompen people. More than 100 former senior civil servants in India raised similar concerns, and their worry is not abstract. The Shompen have almost no exposure to the diseases that the outside world carries. The project in its current form will bring a massive external population to this island. Construction workers, port workers, township residents, people carrying pathogens the Shompen have no immunity to. See, we have seen this movie before. In 1998, an influencer type encounter between the Jarawa tribe of Andaman Islands and the outsiders sparked a measles epidemic amongst them. The Jarawa nearly didn't survive it. The Shompen are even more isolated. Their population is estimated at around only a few hundred individuals. The Nicobarese community, the other group with customary rights on the island, withdrew their no objection certificate for the forest diversion in November 2022, with the community members claiming that they were pressurized into signing it on the first place. So the government contests this, but the withdrawal itself is on record. Now, India is at a genuinely difficult crossroads here. The strategic argument for the project is not manufactured. China's naval expansion in the Indian Ocean region is real. India's dependence on foreign ports are real. The economic potential of the transshipment hub near Malacca is real. And these are not talking points. These are documented, verifiable facts about the world. But the environmental cost is also real. The tribal cost is also real. And the resettling part is that the government's own expert appraisal committee, an independent body appointed by the government itself to evaluate environmental clearances, noted that in 2021 that the site selection for this project prioritized technical and financial considerations with the environmental factors receiving, and I'm paraphrasing the document finding here, limited attention. Now, this is the government's own watchdog saying this, that environment was an afterthought. So India is not choosing between growth and stagnation here. It's choosing between two versions of India's future. One that captures strategic and economic power in the Indo-Pacific, but at the cost that some of its own institutions call irreversible, and one that protects its most extraordinary natural heritage, but risks ceding critical ground in what is the increasingly the most contested ocean on Earth. See, here is one thing which I want you to take away from this video. See, the project is not primarily a development story. It is not primarily an environment story. It is an honest test of what kind of country India wants to be. Every nation that has ever built a real strategic power has paid a price somewhere in land, in communities, in ecosystems. See, China has built this Three Gorges Dam and displaced over 1 million people and drowned entire ecosystems. The US built its transcontinental infrastructure by dismantling indigenous land rights. And this is not justification, it is actually a pattern. Now, the question for India is, is, right now, whether we are aware enough of that pattern to demand something different from it. The Great Nicobar Project is not a choice between having a strategic airbase and not having a one. It is a question of whether India can design strategic ambition with enough intelligence, precision and humility to not repeat the mistakes of every empire that came before it. And here's what makes it different from most other infrastructure debates. The environmental damage being described here is not recoverable. If you build a highway through a forest, you can in theory one day plant trees. If the Galicia Bay leatherback nesting site is destroyed by port destruction or port construction and the airport noise and the light pollution, the turtles do not get a second chance. And if the Shompen contracts a disease from a construction worker, no amount of compensation fixes that. The word that experts keep using, and it's the most important word in the entire debate, that is irreversible. See, India has an opportunity that no other country in this precise geography has. The location of the Great Nicobar is a once in a civilizational gift, but the biodiversity of Great Nicobar and the existence of Shompen are also things that exists precisely once, because they have been protected under the human ambition for thousands of years. The question is whether these two things, strategic ambition or ecological restraint, can be held in the same hand at the same time. India's track record on the front at this is at best, which is mixed. See, the denotification of the Galicia-based turtle sanctuary 1 week after the official declaring it is country's most important leatherback nesting ground does not suggest a government that's thinking about that balance. See, Indian Constitution in Article 51A actually gives every Indian citizen the fundamental duty to protect the natural environment, not as a suggestion but as a duty. And yet the government that derives its authority from the Constitution denotify the country's most important leatherback turtle nesting ground 1 week after formally recognizing it to make way for the port. At the same time, China has now invested in ports in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Myanmar and Pakistan, and it is building a military base in Djibouti as well. And it has been operating in the Indian Ocean in ways that India's Navy has flagged as genuine threats. See, the 6-degree channel, the Maritime passage that this airport will overlook. This is a real choke point in a real geopolitical competition. So here's the question I want to leave with you. If India does not build the airport and China's naval presence in the Eastern Indian Ocean continues to grow unchecked, who answers for that? And if India does build it and the Shompen disappear from history as a direct consequence, and the leatherback turtle loses its last major nesting grounds in the Northern Indian Ocean, who answers for that? Because here's what's interesting. In both the cases, the answer is the same person. Us, the public, the voters, the citizens who decide whether to demand more from their government or simply accept that this is how things have to be. So the real question is not whether the Great Nicobar is a boom or a bane. The real question is whether India is capable of wanting both strategic power and ecological dignity, and whether we are willing to hold our government to that standard. Even when the answer is inconvenient, think about that and tell me what you think in the comment section. I'll be very happy to read them. All the very best. Have a beautiful day. Thank you.